Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Speak and Feel English, the podcast where we explore meaningful conversations that help you grow emotionally, mentally, and personally in a practical and realistic way. I'm Mia, and I'm really excited about today's topic because it is something that affects every single person, regardless of age, background, or experience.
And I'm Ethan. Today, we are diving into something that is often misunderstood, but incredibly important, which is how to control your emotions. Not in the sense of suppressing them or pretending they do not exist, but in a way where you actually understand them, manage them, and use them to make better decisions in your life.
That is such an important distinction because when people hear the phrase, control your emotions, they often think it means becoming cold, distant, or unexpressive. But in reality, emotional control is about awareness, balance, and intentional response rather than automatic reaction.
Exactly, because emotions themselves are not the problem. Emotions are natural and they serve a purpose. They give us information about what is happening within us and around us. The real challenge is how we respond to those emotions, especially when they are intense or overwhelming.
And I think that is where most people struggle. They do not struggle with feeling emotions, but with handling them in the moment. For example, when someone feels angry, they might immediately react by raising their voice or saying something hurtful, and later they regret it.
Yes, and that regret often comes from the fact that the reaction was impulsive rather than thoughtful. When emotions take over, logic takes a step back, and people act in ways that do not align with their values or intentions.
So the question becomes, how do we prevent that from happening? How do we create that space between what we feel and how we act?
It starts with awareness, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Awareness is the foundation of emotional control. If you are not aware of what you are feeling, you cannot manage it. You will simply react without thinking.
That is true, and awareness is not just about recognizing that you are emotional. It is about identifying exactly what you are feeling. Many people use very general terms like, I feel bad or I feel upset, but those words are too vague to be helpful.
Right, because bad can mean 100 different things. It could mean sadness, frustration, anxiety, disappointment, or even guilt. And each of these emotions requires a different kind of response.
So when you take the time to label your emotions accurately, you are already taking a step toward controlling them. Instead of saying, I feel angry, you might realize, I actually feel hurt or I feel disrespected.
And that changes everything, because anger is often just a surface emotion. Underneath it, there is usually something deeper. When you identify that deeper emotion, you can address the real issue instead of reacting to the surface feeling.
Another important aspect of awareness is recognizing when your emotions are starting to build. Most emotional reactions do not happen instantly at full intensity. They build up over time.
Yes, and if you can catch that buildup early, you have a much better chance of managing it. For example, if you notice that you are starting to feel irritated, you can take a step back before it turns into full anger.
That early recognition is powerful because once an emotion reaches a certain level of intensity, it becomes much harder to control. At that point, you are more likely to react impulsively.
And this is where the concept of the pause comes in. There's always a small gap between stimulus and response. Even if it is just a few seconds, that pause gives you the opportunity to choose how you respond.
I love that idea because it reminds us that we are not powerless. Even when emotions feel strong, we still have a choice in how we act.
Exactly. And that choice is what separates emotional reaction from emotional control. Reaction is automatic and impulsive, while control is intentional and thoughtful.
But let's be honest, in real life, that pause is not always easy. When emotions are high, it can feel almost impossible to stop and think before reacting.
That is true, and that is why emotional control is a skill. It is not something you master overnight. It requires practice, patience, and consistency.
And I think it is also important to be kind to yourself during this process. You are not going to handle every situation perfectly, and that's okay. The goal is progress, not perfection.
Absolutely. Because every time you become aware of your emotions, every time you pause before reacting, you are strengthening your ability to control your emotions in the future.
So instead of trying to eliminate emotions, which is impossible, we should focus on understanding them and responding to them in a healthier way.
And that shift in mindset is powerful because it changes the way you see your emotions. Instead of seeing them as something that controls you, you start seeing them as something you can work with.
Exactly. Emotions are not your enemy. They are signals. They are trying to tell you something. And when you learn to listen to those signals without being controlled by them, you gain a level of emotional freedom.
And that is what we are going to explore further in this conversation. We will talk about triggers, practical techniques, and long-term strategies that can help you build emotional strength.
Because at the end of the day, controlling your emotions is not about becoming a different person. It's about becoming a more aware, balanced, and intentional version of yourself. So now that we have established how important awareness is when it comes to controlling emotions, I think the next step is understanding what actually causes these emotional reactions in the first place, because emotions do not just appear randomly without any reason.
Exactly. Every strong emotional reaction has a trigger, and these triggers can come from external situations, interactions with people, or even internal thoughts and beliefs that we carry within ourselves, often without even realizing it.
And what is interesting is that the same situation can trigger completely different emotions in different people, which clearly shows that it is not just the situation itself, but how we interpret it that determines our emotional response.
That is a very important point, because most people think, this situation made me angry. But in reality, it is their perception of the situation that creates the emotion, not the situation alone.
For example, if someone cancels plans at the last moment, one person might feel slightly disappointed but move on quickly, while another person might feel deeply hurt or even angry, thinking that they are not valued or respected.
And that difference usually comes from past experiences or personal beliefs. If someone has a history of feeling ignored or unimportant, that situation might trigger a much stronger emotional response.
So, in order to control your emotions, you have to start identifying your personal triggers, because once you know what affects you deeply, you can prepare yourself to handle it better.
Yes, and one practical way to identify triggers is by observing patterns in your behavior. Think about situations where your reactions feel stronger than the situation actually requires.
That is such a good exercise, because those are the moments where something deeper is usually involved. It is not just about what is happening in the present, but also about what it represents emotionally.
For instance, if someone feels extremely angry when they receive criticism, it might not just be about the criticism itself, but about a deeper fear of not being good enough.
And once you recognize that, your approach changes. Instead of reacting defensively, you can start working on that underlying belief and build confidence over time.
Another important aspect is understanding that triggers are not always external. Sometimes they come from your own thoughts, and this is something many people overlook.
Yes, internal triggers can be just as powerful, if not more. Negative self-talk, overthinking, and assumptions can create emotional reactions even when nothing is actually happening externally.
For instance, if you keep thinking, people are judging me, you might start feeling anxious or uncomfortable, even if no one is actually judging you.
And that shows how closely connected thoughts and emotions are. If you want to control your emotions, you also have to become aware of your thoughts and the stories you tell yourself.
Exactly, because your mind is constantly interpreting situations, and those interpretations directly influence how you feel.
So instead of automatically believing every thought, it is important to question them. Ask yourself, is this thought accurate, or am I assuming something without evidence?
That simple question can create distance between you and your thoughts, which helps reduce emotional intensity.
Another thing that helps with managing triggers is preparation. If you already know what situations tend to trigger you, you can plan how you want to respond in advance.
Yes, this is a very powerful strategy, because when you are prepared, you are less likely to react impulsively. You already have a response in mind that aligns with your values.
For example, if you know that certain conversations tend to frustrate you, you can decide beforehand that you will stay calm, listen carefully, and respectfully.
And even if you don't handle it perfectly, the fact that you had a plan increases your chances of responding better than before.
I also think it's important to mention that not all triggers need to be eliminated. Some situations are part of life, and avoiding them completely is not always possible.
That is true. The goal is not to avoid every uncomfortable emotion, but to build the ability to handle them effectively when they arise.
And that is where growth happens. Because every time you face a trigger and respond differently, you are training your mind to react in a healthier way.
Exactly. Over time, those intense reactions start to weaken, and you gain more control over your emotional responses.
We have explored awareness and emotional triggers. I think this is the part most people are really waiting for, which is how to actually control emotions in real time, especially in those moments when everything feels intense and overwhelming.
Yes, because understanding emotions is important, but the real challenge comes when you are in the middle of a situation where your emotions are already activated and you need something practical that works immediately.
Exactly. And I think one of the simplest but most powerful techniques is the pause. It sounds almost too simple, but it is incredibly effective when practiced consistently.
The pause is powerful because it interrupts the automatic reaction. When something triggers you, your brain wants to respond instantly. But when you pause, even for a few seconds, you create space for a more thoughtful response.
And during that pause, one of the best things you can do is focus on your breathing. Slow, deep breaths can calm your nervous system and reduce the intensity of your emotional reaction.
Yes, because when emotions rise, your body goes into a heightened state. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and your mind becomes more reactive. Deep breathing helps bring your body back to a calmer state.
Another technique that works very well is labeling your emotion in the moment. Instead of being consumed by the feeling, you simply acknowledge it by saying out loud or in your mind, I am feeling frustrated, or I am feeling anxious.
That might seem small, but it creates psychological distance. Instead of saying, I am angry, which feels like your identity, saying, I am feeling anger reminds you that the emotion is temporary and separate from who you are.
And that separation is important because it prevents you from acting as if the emotion defines you. It gives you the ability to observe it rather than be controlled by it.
Another practical strategy is changing your physical state. Your body and mind are deeply connected, so even small physical actions can influence your emotions.
For example, if you are feeling overwhelmed, simply standing up, walking around, or changing your environment can help shift your emotional state.
Yes, movement releases tension and helps break the cycle of overthinking. It also gives your mind a chance to reset.
Reframing is another technique that can be very powerful, especially in emotionally charged situations. It involves looking at the situation from a different perspective.
For instance, if someone says something that upsets you, instead of immediately assuming negative intent, you can consider alternative explanations. Maybe they are having a difficult day or didn't realize how their words would affect you.
That shift in perspective can reduce the intensity of your emotional reaction and help you respond more calmly and rationally.
And it's important to note that reframing is not about denying your feelings. It's about broadening your perspective so that your emotions do not become overwhelming.
Another technique that I personally find helpful is delaying your reaction. You don't always have to respond immediately, especially in situations where emotions are high.
That is a great point, because many mistakes happen when people feel pressure to respond right away. Taking time to think can prevent unnecessary conflict.
For example, if you receive a message that makes you upset, instead of replying instantly, you can take some time to calm down and respond later with a clearer mind.
And that delay often leads to better communication, because you are responding from a place of clarity rather than emotion.
Another powerful tool is grounding yourself in the present moment. When emotions become overwhelming, your mind often starts racing with thoughts about the past or the future.
Yes, grounding techniques bring your focus back to the present. This can be as simple as paying attention to your surroundings, noticing what you can see, hear, or feel in that moment.
That awareness helps reduce emotional intensity because it shifts your focus away from the thoughts that are fueling your emotions.
And finally, I think it's important to remind yourself that you are in control of your actions, even if you are not in control of your emotions.
That is such a powerful reminder because it reinforces personal responsibility. You can't always control what you feel,
but you can control how you respond.
Exactly. And that is where true emotional control lies. It's not about stopping emotions, but about choosing your behavior despite them.
And the more you practice these techniques, the easier it becomes. What feels difficult at first eventually becomes natural over time.
Because emotional control is like any other skill. The more you practice it, the stronger it becomes.
We talked about awareness, triggers, and real-time techniques, but I think it is equally important to focus on long-term emotional control because real transformation does not happen in a single moment. It happens through consistent habits and self-development over time.
Absolutely. And long-term emotional control is really about building emotional resilience. This means developing the ability to handle difficult emotions without being overwhelmed or controlled by them.
And resilience is not something you are born with. It is something you build through experience, reflection, and intentional effort. Every time you face a challenging emotion and handle it better than before, you are strengthening that resilience.
Yes, and one of the most effective ways to build resilience is through self-reflection. Taking time to think about your emotional reactions after a situation has passed can teach you a lot about yourself.
For example, instead of just moving on after an argument or a stressful moment, you can ask yourself questions like, what exactly was I feeling? Why did I react that way? And what could I do differently next time?
Those questions are powerful because they turn every emotional experience into a learning opportunity. Instead of repeating the same patterns, you start improving them.
Another important factor in long-term emotional control is managing your overall mental and physical well-being. People often underestimate how much their lifestyle affects their emotional stability.
That is very true. Because when you are constantly tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, your ability to regulate emotions decreases significantly. Even small issues can feel much bigger than they actually are.
So things like getting enough rest, maintaining a balanced routine, and taking care of your physical health play a major role in emotional control.
And it's not just about physical health. Mental habits also matter a lot. The way you think on a daily basis shapes how you feel and react.
Yes. For example, if you constantly focus on negative thoughts or worst-case scenarios, your emotional state will reflect that. But if you train your mind to focus on solutions and possibilities, your emotions will become more balanced.
That is why practicing positive thinking, or more accurately, realistic and constructive thinking, is so important for long-term emotional control.
Another key aspect is setting boundaries. Many people struggle with emotional overwhelm because they take on too much or allow others to cross their limits.
Exactly. And when you don't set boundaries, you end up feeling frustrated, exhausted, and sometimes even resentful. That emotional buildup can lead to strong reactions later.
So learning to say no, protecting your time, and being clear about your limits is not selfish. It is necessary for maintaining emotional balance.
And along with boundaries, having healthy communication is also important. Expressing your feelings in a calm and clear way can prevent a lot of emotional buildup.
That's true, because when you keep your emotions inside for too long, they tend to come out in unhealthy ways. But when you express them properly, you release that pressure.
Another long-term strategy is developing patience. Emotional control often requires you to tolerate discomfort instead of reacting immediately.
And patience is something that develops over time. The more you practice staying calm in difficult situations, the easier it becomes.
I also think it's important to accept that negative emotions are a part of life. Trying to avoid them completely can actually make them stronger.
Yes, acceptance is a key part of emotional control. When you accept your emotions instead of fighting them, they lose some of their intensity.
And that does not mean you let them control you. It simply means you acknowledge them without resistance, which makes it easier to manage them.
Another important factor is consistency. Emotional control is not something you practice once and master forever. It requires ongoing effort.
Exactly. And there will be setbacks. There will be moments when you react emotionally, and that is completely normal. What matters is how you learn from those moments.
So instead of being hard on yourself, you can see those moments as part of the process. Growth is not linear, and improvement takes time.
And over time, you will notice that situations that once triggered strong reactions no longer affect you in the same way.
That's when you realize that your emotional control has improved, not because your emotions disappeared, but because your response to them has changed.
And that change is what leads to better relationships, clearer thinking, and a more balanced life overall.
As we come to the final part of this conversation, I think it is important to bring everything together and remind ourselves that controlling your emotions is not about becoming someone who never feels anything deeply, but about becoming someone who understands their emotions and responds to them with clarity and intention.
Exactly, because emotions are a natural part of being human. You will feel anger, frustration, sadness, excitement, and everything in between. The goal is not to eliminate these emotions, but to develop the ability to experience them without losing control over your actions.
And throughout this conversation, we have explored how awareness is the foundation. When you can identify what you are feeling and why you are feeling it, you already take the first step toward emotional control.
Then we talked about triggers, which are the underlying causes of strong emotional reactions. Understanding your triggers allows you to anticipate situations and prepare yourself instead of being caught off guard.
We also discussed practical techniques like pausing, breathing, reframing, and delaying your reactions, which can help you manage emotions in real time when they feel most intense.
And finally, we focused on long-term strategies like building resilience, practicing self-reflection, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and setting boundaries, all of which contribute to emotional stability over time.
When you look at all of these together, you start to see that emotional control is not a single action. It is a combination of awareness, practice, and consistency.
And I think one of the most important things to remember is that progress in emotional control is often subtle. You might not notice dramatic changes overnight, but small improvements add up over time.
For example, maybe earlier you would react immediately in a situation, but now you pause for a few seconds before responding. That might seem like a small change, but it is actually a significant step forward.
Or maybe situations that used to upset you for hours now only affect you for a few minutes. That is also progress, and it shows that your emotional resilience is improving.
It is also important to be patient with yourself during this process. There will be moments when you lose control or react in ways you later regret, and that is completely normal.
What matters is not perfection, but reflection. Instead of judging yourself harshly, you can ask, what can I learn from this situation? And use it as an opportunity to grow.
Because every emotional experience, whether positive or negative, teaches you something about yourself. And the more you learn, the better you become at handling future situations.
Another important reminder is that emotional control does not mean suppressing your feelings. Ignoring or pushing away emotions can actually make them stronger over time.
Yes, true control comes from acknowledging your emotions, understanding them, and then choosing how to respond. It is about balance, not avoidance.
And when you reach that balance, you start to feel more in control of your life overall. Your decisions become more thoughtful, your relationships improve, and your stress levels decrease.
Because instead of being controlled by momentary feelings, you are guided by your values and long-term goals.
And that is what emotional maturity really looks like. It's not about always staying calm, but about handling emotions in a way that aligns with who you want to be.
So if you are listening to this and thinking that controlling your emotions feels difficult, just remember that it is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice.
Start small. Pay attention to your emotions, notice your triggers, and practice even the simplest techniques like pausing and breathing.
Over time, those small efforts will create meaningful change, and you will begin to see situations differently and respond more effectively.
And most importantly, remember that you are not trying to become perfect. You are simply trying to become more aware, more balanced, and more intentional.
That is where real growth happens, not in perfection, but in consistent improvement.
And with that, we come to the end of today's conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us on Speak and Feel English. We hope this discussion gave you practical insights and a new perspective on how to control your emotions.
If you found this podcast helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss future episodes.
And do not forget to share this with someone who might benefit from it.
Keep learning, keep growing, and keep working on becoming the best version of yourself.
We will see you in the next episode.